Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Bookends and Books. In my previous video, I presented the best and the worst books that I read in 2024. And the crown for the worst, absolute worst book I read in 2024 went to Wifedom by Anna Funder. And I promised that this book deserved a rant review of its own, so here it is. This is going to be a very negative video. So what is this book? This is supposed to be a non-fiction book. It is supposed to be a biography of the wife of George Orwell. So it's this woman that you can't really see because there's something very meta about this book. You don't see her completely until page, do I remember correctly, 374. Is that it? Is that it? Yes, it is. At page 374, we get the first complete picture of the face of Eileen Orwell. How will I call her? I'll call her just Eileen because this woman was born Eileen O'Shaughnessy. She married a man called Eric Blair, who is most famously known under his pen name George Orwell. So he is the writer of 1984, Animal Farm, and a bunch of non-fiction about Catalonia, about living on the streets in Paris and London, about the mines in the north of England, and social issues that were important at the time. He died relatively young, but his wife died before him because she was sick and did not get the care that she needed. So this book is part biography, part memoir, because the author explains a lot, her research and why she's writing and all of that, and it is mainly fiction. I'm saying that because for one part I think a lot of the non-fiction part is pure fiction, but also because there's a lot of fiction in it. In fact, it starts like this. Suffolk, November 1936, and as you can perhaps see, the text doesn't take the entire width of the page. You turn the page and it continues being just narrowly in the middle of the page. And then at some point in the next chapter, it takes the full width of the page. And these bits that take only 2/3 in the middle of the page, that is fiction. Because the author, in fact, really wanted to write historical fiction. She had a vision of the wife of George Orwell as a character, and she decided to create that fiction within her non-fiction book. In and of itself, if the fiction is well separated from the non-fiction, it shouldn't be an issue. However, I have the distinct impression that the fictional character of Eileen fed the so-called non-fiction part. So the non-fiction depends on the fictional idea that Anna Funder made herself, that she created of Eileen Orwell, more than the other way around. It should be the non-fiction research leads to the fictional character, and that's what Anna Funder thinks that she does. But I'll show you more precisely all the little yellow stickers. That's places that are at issue that cause a problem. So Anna Funder thinks that her non-fiction is feeding her fiction, but it's patently obvious that it's the other way around. It's her fiction that fed her non-fiction, and for that reason, the result is crap. Because non-fiction that is based on fiction is crap. So as I said, it starts with letters. I don't remember the exact year. I read this in April and I have not reread it just before filming this, just to make a better video. I should have if I was more conscientious, but this is an impressionistic review. I hate this book for these reasons. So it starts with fiction, and the context of the fiction is that relatively recently, letters written by Eileen Orwell. I'm going to say Orwell, even though that I don't think she herself ever signed her name Eileen Orwell. It was probably Eileen Blair after she got married. But I'm going to say Eileen Orwell because it's easier. The letters letters that she wrote to a childhood friend whose name is Nora. And these letters were found, and they sort of revealed an aspect of Eileen Orwell that was not well known. Anna Funder read all the biographies that were written of George Orwell, well, all of them. She read 8 or 9 of them, so I think that's pretty much all of them. And what she notices is that his wife barely ever gets a mention. And she's envious of that because she wishes, as a writer, that she could have the same condition that George Orwell had to write. That means somebody who takes care of the kids, who takes care of the cleaning, the cooking, the shopping, who takes care of everything in the house so that the writer can be dedicated 100% to his craft. And she's envious of that. And she decides that this reality, that Orwell did all of his writing because his wife's work enabled it, meant that Eileen deserved to be plucked out of obscurity and put in the limelight, because without her, Orwell would never have been able to write what he wrote. And Anna Funder says that she is a fan of George Orwell, that she loves his writing, that she loves his sensibility, because in all, not all, I don't know, I haven't read his nonfiction. Disclaimer here, the only George Orwell that I've read are Animal Farm and 1984. I have not read his nonfiction. However, I know by the title and by the content of his nonfiction that he cares about he cares about people who are not the most privileged in life. He was on the left. So if we go on the political scene, he was on the left. He actually went to Spain during the Civil War to fight with the Republicans, the Socialists, the Communists, so that the group on the left, the coalition of leftist groups fighting against the forces of Franco, who are on the right of the political spectrum. So Anna Funder has sympathies for what George Orwell wrote, but she realizes that his upbringing and his life did not reflect necessarily his belief. So her mission is to pluck Eileen Orwell out of obscurity and give her the light that she deserves, and give her the recognition that she deserves for her husband's work. Now, I don't know if you see the problem there, but suppose it was the other way around. Suppose that it was a woman writer who had these conditions, a husband who took care of everything so that she could write. Would we accept that the husband needs to be plucked out of obscurity to be given credit for his wife's work? I don't think it would work. So already the premise is not particularly solid. Okay, for the rest, I'm going to go chronologically in the order of the issues in the books. As you can see, I put little numbers on my orange tabs. So we start. First problem. Page 23. The author feels justified to, feels obligated to justify the writing of the book. Orwell's work is precious to me. I didn't want to take, sorry, my sticker's in the way. I didn't want to take it or him down in any way. I worried he might risk being cancelled by the story I'm telling. No, you will not cancel George Orwell. Just calm down. It's one book is not enough to do that. Very few people are being cancelled, and when they are cancelled, it's living authors. Dead authors are never cancelled. Get over yourself. Okay, let's continue. Though I worried he might risk being cancelled by the story I'm telling, though she, of course, has been cancelled already, she being Eileen Orwell, by patriarchy. I needed to find a way to hold them all, work, man and wife, in a constellation in my mind, each part keeping the other in place. So she has decided that Eileen Orwell is a victim of patriarchy, and it's her mission in life to take it out. And then she justifies her vignettes, I don't know if I can call them that, her fictional scenes, because the book starts, as I showed you, with something that is fictional, and these types of pages that are just like 2/3 of the page is occupied, and it's just pure fiction, they come up again and again and again and again. It's probably between 1/3 and half of the book that is obviously openly fiction. That's an issue because I'm buying a nonfiction. I paid, how much did I pay for that book? Is the price written on it? $42 plus tax for that book. And it's supposed to be nonfiction. And a third of it, if not half of it, is fiction. But she justifies what she does, saying that it's based on research and that she doesn't really invent anything. Sometimes I write a scene based on what happened. Mostly, I supply only what a film director would, directing an actor on set. The wiping of spectacles, the ash on the carpet, a cat pouring itself off her lap. Now, it's not true that she does just that. She also creates dialogues, she creates relationships, she creates feelings and impressions, and she has no proof of that. And also saying that I did only what a film director does. It's enormous. It's not only, it is an enormous change. So for example, we have plenty of movies or TV series based on nonfiction books. And once it is put into a movie or a TV series, it is not a documentary anymore. It becomes a work of fiction. So this creating of scenes, this creating of a background of little actions here and there, this creation of tension, of the creation of a scene is the creation of a work of fiction. And if it is based on a true story, it doesn't make it non-fiction. It is still fiction. Think of, I don't know, The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, and it's supposedly based on a biography of Alan Turing. Well, if you read the biography and then you watch the movie, you will see tons of discrepancies between both. Same thing with Band of Brothers. We'll stick with World War II. So Band of Brothers and the book by Stephen Ambrose, and then the TV series by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. There's a lot of things have been created. Scenes have been created. Dialogues. Characters have been mushed together, and things that one person did have been attributed to another because there would be just too many characters. So saying I did nothing more than that, it's already enormous. You're changing your work of nonfiction into a work of fiction. And then that leads us to, is that it? Yes, part 3. That is, in my opinion, the example of what is wrong with this attitude of saying I did only that. So now I'm going to read a little bit that is in the nonfiction part. So it takes the entire width of the page. With Lydia's help, Lydia being, I've already forgot, somebody who was close to Eileen and who left documents behind. I can see Orwell and Eileen standing at the mantelpiece in Rosalind's Hempstead flat that night. So that is the night where they met. Anna Funder says that nobody noticed how it happened. They just know, everybody knows that this is where they met. It's the first time they were in the presence of one another, but nobody noticed anything. They didn't notice that they spent the entire night together. They didn't notice if they had a lot of chit-chat, if they were very quiet and shy. Nobody noticed anything. So she just imagines what happened. So she imagines them swapping stories about the species of people who run small private schools or tin pot tyrants in the colonial service in secretarial agencies. I see them, so she imagines them, talking about the poor and their lives, vagrants, tramps, hop pickers, and prostitutes, as individuals they've known and as victims of an unjust social system. I see them, again, she imagines, noticing and taking comfort in each other's, sorry, my sticker's in the way, in each other's gawkiness. She's all elbows, his own slips off the mantelpiece. She's all elbows, his own slips off the mantelpiece, and he rains ash everywhere. He stoops to pick up the coal pan and brush to sweep it up. She watches as he rubs it further into the carpet. That scene I have an issue with. Because in that scene, that would mean that Orwell realizes that he dropped ashes on the carpet and he tries to pick it up. Nowhere in the book does she ever show Orwell being aware of his surrounding. The picture that she brushes of Orwell, I haven't read any biography. My only source of information is this book. And the picture that Anna Funder creates of George Orwell is a man oblivious to everyone around him, oblivious to anything around him. So the fact that he dropped ashes on the carpet and then would try to pick it up and just instead makes a mess of it. And basically she turns this theoretical, this encounter that we know happened, but her version of it is a meet cute in a romance. In romance books, that's the way it's happened. The guy is all awkward. He tries to do something nice and he messes it up. And then the girl says, oh, he's so cute. I'll date him, almost out of pity. But there's not a single proof, a single shred of evidence that George Orwell could have had the attention, could have been attentive enough to notice the mess that he created and feel that he is responsible for picking it up. Because supposing he created a mess, I guarantee you he expects a woman to pick it up, regardless of whether it's his girlfriend, his cleaning lady, but he expects that picking up after a man is the job of a woman. So if she imagines George Orwell being attentive, then she creates a George Orwell who is manipulative, when in fact, there's no shred of evidence that George Orwell is manipulative, that he ever presented himself as being somebody he is not. So this fiction that she says is nothing except creating a little bit of a scene based on facts is not true. She's creating a character that doesn't exist. George Orwell is oblivious, and she says so time and time again, and she has proof of that. She quotes other people. He is oblivious to everyone around him. That was on page 45. Now we are moving to page 80. Again, we are in a non-fiction bit. She writes that her friend Lydia, she sees what Eileen doesn't yet, the masochism it will demand of her to survive it. Survive it being marriage to George Orwell and the conditions in which they are going to live, because George Orwell had the dream of having a little farm and living off his little farm and selling the product at the market and all of that. But he never did it on his own because he was waiting for a wife to do all of the work. At least that is the story that Anna Funder presents. So here we are being presented with a conclusion before we are presented with the facts. So we are force-fed the conclusion that Eileen doesn't know yet that she will have to be a masochist to survive living with George Orwell. I don't like that. That is bad fiction. That is bad non-fiction. Sorry, it can be correct fiction, but it's bad non-fiction just to present your conclusion first and then perhaps maybe present facts that will support it. And it doesn't work. So that's one of my gripes also, that the author Anna Funder tends to present her conclusions in the fiction first, and then she presents them in the non-fiction part. But the problem becomes, did the fiction come first or the non-fiction come first? And that is what makes me think that the fiction fed the non-fiction and not the other way around. Because the conclusions are presented in the fiction and then she justifies her little work of fiction with the non-fiction. At number 5, this is a chapter that is fictional, as you can see, but it starts with a bit of a warning. Something, not this, but essentially this, must have happened. Essentially this must have happened. That sentence should have preceded every scene of fiction, but no, she waits page 160 to write it. It should have been before every piece of fiction. Something like this happened. Not this happened. Something like this happened. Then, page 172. This is the part where George Orwell and his wife are in Catalonia and fighting against the forces of Franco. And one of the gripes that Anna Funder has against George Orwell is that in his book Homage, I don't know how to say that in English, Homage to Catalonia, he does not mention Eileen. At some point he used the passive tense to say someone did this and someone did that and closed the office and they left and all of that. That was Eileen who did that. She was there when Barcelona was bombarded. Bombs exploded not very far from her. And she was in the middle of the action while George Orwell himself was not. And she blames Orwell for not writing his wife in the story. And she decides that he did that out of jealousy, out of spite, out of being just a big macho who doesn't want to acknowledge that his wife is brave. Now, it's possible that all of that played a role in George Orwell's intention in his writing of Homage to Catalonia. But I'm thinking it's also possible that he decided not to name Eileen to protect her, because after all, they were fighting along with the communists. And in case you didn't know, in the 1930s and 40s, the communists were not well received in England. So perhaps it was foresight to think, okay, I'll put myself out there, say I was there, so I'll sell books and we'll have money to eat, but you will be protected. We'll not say that you were there. And if there's trouble with that, if we end up in concentration camps, at least you will have deniability. You will be able to say, I never was there. Perhaps it could be a possibility. I don't know. I haven't read anything by George Orwell. I haven't read the biographies of George Orwell that Anna Funder talks about. I don't know anything. But I know that bit, that communists were not well seen in the 1940s in England, and that for that reason, not mentioning his wife as being with the communists could be something positive. So that's another thing that I hate about this book, is that the author, Anna Funder, always ascribes the worst motives to George Orwell in his behavior towards Eileen, in his behavior towards any woman. She ascribes to him the worst motives without any proof. It could be partly, his actions could be justified, it's possible that George Orwell acted in this way because, in part, of these motives. But it could be also in part because of something more positive. And that is never acknowledged, not a single time in the book. Next, we reach a place where my blood really started to pump. Now, at first, as you can see, I have plenty of gripes already. And now at page 190, we reach the middle of the book. And that is where I really confirmed that I had no reason to trust Anna Funder in this book. It's sort of, this line just, it made me so uncomfortable that I lost all trust in Anna Funder because of that single line. So we are about halfway throughout the book, and Eileen is typing what George Orwell wrote. So she's writing what Orwell wrote about the war in Spain. And she sets the scene because for Anna Funder, the importance in this book is to set the scene. It's not to present the nonfiction. It's not to present what Eileen is typing. It's to present the scene. So she places the cigarillo in the glass ashtray. She wonders if anyone ever will find her here between the lines she is typing. Can you hear? Can you hear? Coming from 70 years away? Hang in there, Eileen! I'll save you! And that's Anna Funder from 7 Decades Away. She is writing herself in her scene of fiction. She is writing a version of Eileen Orwell, thinking about Anna Funder, who's going to save her 70 years away. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. As I said, that's the place where I sort of lost all trust in Anna Funder, and I started to be very, very skeptical, and the number of little papers just started to multiply, and comments, and just, what proof have you had? There's no proof for that. That's pure fiction. And that's the comments I kept writing over and over again, because it's clear that Anna Funder is so obsessed with Eileen that Eileen is now thinking about Anna Funder. This character that she has created is so fictional that she's thinking that Anna Funder inserted herself in the fictional character of Eileen. It's absolutely ridiculous. So from that point on, I did not trust the book, and I was particularly critical. And it continues. So I'm going to skip quite a few pages because every little paper of saying what proof have you, what's the point, and all of that, it could be a bit long. So on page 253, now we are a bit in the memoir part, because it's the part where, we're not really in the memoir part, because these memoir sentences are inserted here and there in the middle of the research. And it's Anna Funder telling us how she finds the information and why she finds it relevant and all of that. In this case, this is the testimony from a friend of Eileen, a Margaret Branch, a psychotherapist friend of Eileen. And she describes Eileen as being a bit of a dreamer. Now, that's Anna Funder talking. What does it mean to be a dreamer in the way Eileen is? The word makes me flinch, which is how I know it is hitting a truth I don't want to see. No. Your reaction to a sentence doesn't give you any clues as to the truth of the sentence. It's not because you react badly that it is true. It's not because you react well that it is true. It has nothing to do, your reaction has nothing to do with the veracity of the statement. So that is a terrible shortcut. So let's imagine, for the sake of giving Anna Funder the benefit of the doubt, which at this point I don't, but let's say that this sentence means, I was shocked by this statement that Eileen is a dreamer, and I question myself, why do I find this shocking? Is it because I haven't found anything in my research to support that statement and that I'm wondering why that person is saying that? Oh no, now I am realizing that it is all over my research, but I never noticed it. And I never noticed it because it was not part of the fiction I was creating about Eileen. That is what the sentence is saying. Because there's another sentence after that. Because we can see that it's a little bit that. We are part flesh, part fiction. Even if that fiction is made, like this one on this page, of real materials. So she admits that she's writing an Eileen Orwell who is pure fiction. And worse than that, her Eileen Orwell who is worse fiction, we are now about 2/3 of the way in, page 250, it doesn't match the research. Because the research shows that Eileen is a dreamer, and up until page 250, it has not been included in the book. So that is my question. Once she realized that, once Funder realized that her character of Eileen was all wrong, did she rewrite everything that she had written? Did she rethink all of her research? Or did she just leave it there as is and then change course? There's no way for us to know because we just have that little sentence, that little interpretation, and then it's ditched. Eileen Orwell as a dreamer, there it is for a couple of lines, and then it disappears. Page 263. I was talking earlier about George Orwell being someone who is completely oblivious, and that throughout the book, Anna Funder accuses him of being deliberately cruel to Eileen, when in fact, in my opinion, according to what Anna Funder is showing in the book, is only that George Orwell was completely oblivious to his surroundings and particularly to women around him. But just to give you an example, because Anna Funder gives us all the examples of George Orwell being completely oblivious. It's during the war, Second World War in London. There's a time Eileen is staying at a friend's place because it's more convenient, or they are somewhat separated. I don't remember. Anyway, she still goes and cooks for George Orwell. So Eileen cooks for him before going to Gwen's. Once she leaves shepherd's pie warming in the oven and puts out boiled eels for the cat they've adopted. Orwell eats the eels, notices nothing untoward. So can a man be more oblivious than that, to eat the cat food and not notice that there's human food in the oven? The man is oblivious to his surroundings. So I don't believe Funder at all when she accuses him of being deliberately cruel towards Eileen. He's just very selfish and completely oblivious to other people. And she shows it time and time and again that he's oblivious and cruel towards everyone around him because he's oblivious to everyone around him. So again, it's another clue that this book is not coherent with itself. Oh yeah. Another time. So just a little bit earlier, Anna Funder was thinking of Eileen as thinking of Anna Funder in the future. Now, Anna Funder has become Eileen. We are in a little fictional scene, and she is writing to her friend Nora. And Eileen gets out of bed. She sits in her dressing gown at the desk. She hasn't seen Nora for such a long time. She is almost a fiction. No, Nora was not a fiction for Eileen. Nora is a fiction for Anna Funder because Anna Funder is writing fiction. It's really annoying that this it's annoying. Let's continue. On page 271, Anna Funder is talking about biographies of George Orwell and how they are creating fiction. Among other things, they are saying that George Orwell and his wife had an agreement that it was an open marriage. And they say that to justify all of Orwell's infidelities. And this is what Anna Funder has to say about it. The biographer then goes a step further with his fiction of consent to an open marriage. And at this point, I'm thinking that it's hilarious that she is complaining that a biographer uses fiction and that her tool to counteract that fiction is to create a work of pure fiction. It's completely absurd. And yeah, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. And then we move on to page 285. Oh, that's another sentence. Again, just one little sentence that made me so angry. So we have a scene where somebody is remembering Eileen preparing something. So the person is Ruth. Ruth notices something odd, something new, something she doesn't like. Eileen is anxious to core the apples properly for a pie because Orwell doesn't like it when he finds any tiny hard bits left in. Well, I don't like it either. Anyway, the next sentence. It is the tiny hard bits like this that I don't like, though I leave them in. Is there any way to read that sentence that is not completely smug, that is not completely self-satisfied, that is not just pure ego at the amazing quality of her works? I don't like these little hard bits, but I leave them in. And the worst is, I don't agree that she leaves in the hard bits. I don't agree. She evacuates them. The hard bit would be to recognize that Eileen Orwell is not that important. It's sad to say, but George Orwell would have written his works regardless of the existence of Eileen. If he had married another woman, he would have written the exact same thing. Perhaps, granted, he needed to be married to be able to do what he did, to have the time and not to have the freedom to write all of what he did and just dedicate his life to writing. Okay, perhaps he had to be married for that. But did he have to be married specifically to Eileen? No, not necessarily. He could have married someone else and the result would have been the same. Another thing that she completely evacuates is the 1930s and the 1940s. So at the beginning of the book, not quite at the beginning, but at one of the places where I was complaining, it was written that Eileen was basically a victim of patriarchy, a victim of masochism and a victim of patriarchy. And the thing is, in the 1930s, most women did not view their situation like that. If you asked a woman in the 1930s and 1940s, and are you feeling like a victim because you have to take care of your husband and your children? And most of them would have looked at you very weirdly as saying, well, what's wrong with you? Of course I'm taking care of my husband, my children. Anna Funder completely evacuates the mentality of the 1930s and 40s. She decides that Eileen is a victim, and then she doesn't take into account anything in the surrounding, in her surroundings, in the era, in the time, that could show that she was not a victim, that she was just a woman like any other. And yes, the 1930s were not in the 1930s, women were perhaps not as free as they are now. But anyway, the fact of having children and having a husband was not being a victim of patriarchy. And in fact, Anna Funder makes it quite clear that Eileen wanted a family. She wanted to get married. She wanted to have children. So to portray her as a victim of patriarchy is leaving out the hard bits. It's leaving the hard bits out, and it's leaving the ego in, because I don't know, I don't know who the editor is, the publisher, but if I was the editor, I would have told the author, remove that line. Just remove it. It's such in poor taste. There's also the question of what is the hard bit. Is the hard bit, well, just the apples? No, of course not. It's not. It's just, she's just talking about herself. So that was one of the worst ones. The sort of the cherry on the sundae, the icing on the cake. Just thinking, this entire book is about Anna Funder, even though it appears to be about Eileen Orwell, but it's about Anna Funder. Again, we have a little piece of fiction where it's supposed to be someone from the 1940s speaking. Lydia, I forgot who Lydia is, but we can assume she's a friend of Eileen. Lydia and a friend have been living there, meaning at the cottage where Eileen and George used to be. In the bottom drawer of his desk, he finds her letters from right back at the beginning, open-hearted and full of a different future. Lydia sees him burning letters, so George is burning letters of Eileen when emptying the cottage after her death. She feels a pang of anxiety. They are not his to burn, but of course they are. Who will tell the story? So now, again, it's in the mouth of Lydia, but it's Anna Funder's thinking of herself. Who will tell the story? Well, I will. So she, again, writes herself in the nonfiction bit. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then at the very end, in the coda, page 396, she confirms it. To write this book, I have used another voice for parts of it, Eileen's, because I lost the one I had. So she cannot write this book herself. She cannot write just a memoir because nobody will care about a memoir by Anna Funder saying that she's a victim of patriarchy. Nobody will care about that. So she writes a book about Eileen Orwell, who is somewhat insignificant, and decides that she will be the victim of patriarchy in her stead. So I retrieved Eileen from behind the Cerberus, from under the ignoring, minimizing, and passive voicing. I retrieved her from under her own self-erasure, her attentive listening. When I found her, I could see what such forces and I, as co-conspirator, had done to me. Not to her, to me. So this just comes and confirmed that the entire book is not at all about Eileen Orwell. It's about Anna Funder, and she creates the character of Eileen Orwell, a fictional version of Eileen Orwell who is super important, who is super essential to George Orwell, and she was as being his wife and helping him, and she played the role that any wife played, probably still play today, of taking care of the husband, of taking care of daily life so that the husband can have a life outside the home. And she uses this version of Eileen Orwell as a victim of patriarchy, who was limited by the circumstances, who could have been so much more if only she had wanted to, because that's the thing. She came from an educated background. If she had divorced, chances are she would have been welcome in her family. She would not have been thrown out, and she would have been able to work. And Anna Funder imagined an Eileen Orwell who wants to write for herself, who wants to be a writer, because apparently she contributed to Animal Farm and made suggestions and all of that. She could have been. And Anna Funder is frustrated that Eileen Orwell did not become a writer, but that George Orwell did. We have not a shred of evidence that Eileen Orwell ever wanted to be a writer, that she ever wanted to be a university professor, that she ever wanted to be anything than what she ended up being. That is the wife of George Orwell. This work is fiction. As non-fiction, it is garbage. As fiction, it's super interesting. It's really well written. If you hate non-fiction, read this. You'll love it. And if you love non-fiction, don't read this. It's shit. It's garbage. It's a bad non-fiction. So that concludes this very long review of the worst book that I've read in 2024, one of the worst nonfiction ever, who managed being nominated for a bunch of prizes, including making the long list for the first ever Women's Prize for Nonfiction. And I was so relieved when it did not make the shortlist and did not make the finals and did not win, because if that had won, gosh, it would have been awful for women writers of nonfiction. That would have meant that women writing nonfiction is women writing fiction. Yeah, another thing that I hate about this fiction being presented as nonfiction. When nonfiction is given the fiction treatment, so-called creative nonfiction, when nonfiction becomes more like a novel, I feel like I am this group at the bottom of the food chain, who is supposed to be grateful that the thing that they love, which is nonfiction, is being elevated by receiving the fiction treatment, by being more creative and by being less true. Isn't it better? And no, it's not better. It's a million times worse. Please stop doing that, please. I'm tempted to say, please stop teaching creative nonfiction, because it leads to very, very bad nonfiction. It perhaps leads to good nonfiction, but it leads to very, very bad nonfiction. It leads to a blurring of the lines between fiction and nonfiction. And in this era of misinformation and of fake news and all of that, it's important to draw the line between fiction and nonfiction, and this book absolutely sucks at it. There's just a little sprinkling of nonfiction, and then she uses that to create some fiction, and then the author doesn't remember what was nonfiction, and she takes her nonfiction to create so-called nonfiction that is just pure fiction again. It's a vicious circle, very, very, very vicious circle of fiction feeding nonfiction, that then feeds fiction, that feeds nonfiction, and it just ends up being pure fiction. It's just a muddle, and this is a muddle. So that's my rant. 45 minutes, it's not bad. I think I've ranted long enough. This is a terrible book. If you like fiction, read it. If you like nonfiction, stay away from it. And that's it. And thank you everyone for watching. If you stayed all the way this long for this rant, thank you, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine.